Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Dear Excellencies, Ministers, Ambassadors, Justices, dear colleagues, dear friends. It is a tremendous honor to welcome you all to the 2022 International Environmental Law Conference here at the very heart of the city, at the beautiful ceremonial hall of the University of Oslo Faculty of Law. My name is Christina Voigt. I'm a professor here at this faculty, and I am the chair of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law. This conference is jointly organized by the IUCN World Commission and the Faculty of Law. For the World Commission, this is the third World Environmental Law Conference, following the first one, 2016, in Rio de Janeiro, and a hybrid one that took place in 2020. I would like to express my deep gratitude to all of you who followed our invitation and join us from near and far, either in person or online. We received an overwhelming response to our call for abstracts, and this allowed us to gather about 200 speakers for the next 4 days. We had to close the registration at 400 people due to capacity constraints. And the speakers come from almost all parts of the world. It is a truly global gathering. But we were not only careful to balance the geographical participation, but also to balance different professional perspectives. We have academics, we have judges, we have diplomats with us, civil servants, politicians, decision makers, UN staff, general counsels of development banks and other financial institutions, and legal counsels to ministries of foreign affairs, and many more. And we made a very conscious effort in including also younger, early career voices. All this to allow for constructive and engaging discussions. We take from this response from you that this is a promising sign that the topic of the conference, the transformative power of law addressing global environmental challenges, is a theme that unites us in its urgency and seriousness, and that unites us in all these different professional voices in a broad and deep exchange about the role of our common vocation, the role of law, and the role and responsibilities of lawyers and judges in addressing the accumulating global crises of biodiversity loss, climate change, and global pollution. Law and lawyers have a crucial role to play in this situation because they often hold positions of power and great influence in working with the governance tool to address human behavior, the law. We will, over the next 4 days, critically discuss the adequacy, effectiveness, legitimacy, and fairness of current legislation considering the environmental challenges at stake. A core question will be, can these environmental challenges be solved by using the legal tools available? And we will inquire into the possibilities of law and emerging legal tools, about what is needed but missing, but also the limits and shortcomings of legal responses. This conference seeks to bring together innovative thinking and practice on how legal tools can be improved, advanced, amended, and changed. What is needed of the law to act as a catalyst for transformative change? I would like at this stage to welcome our first speaker, the Honorable Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Anniken Huitfeldt, who despite her incredibly busy schedule, given the current serious state of affairs, has taken the time to join us here this morning. This, I believe, underlines the fact that the protection of the environment and the legal tools required are of utmost importance to Norway in its engagement with the world. We are grateful and very privileged to be able to welcome you here, Ms. Huitfeldt.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to attend the opening of this conference. We live in trying times. A brutal armed conflict is raging in our close neighborhood. It is therefore inspiring and also somewhat relaxing to be present here today. There is nothing relaxing, of course, about the topic for your conversations for the next 4 days. You'll discuss issues of critical importance for the future of our humanity. Just like Edvard Munch's paintings on these walls, you will be grappling with the truly big questions in life. There is nothing more important than ensuring planetary health and sustainable growth. Norway is deeply committed to addressing the global environmental crisis. In order to overcome them, we must be able to transform the nature of international law. We must find ways for the global community to enter into new global legal commitments that force us to make the necessary systemic changes. We must also continue to hold states and non-state actors accountable when legal commitments already in place are violated. Finding common solutions for these pressing issues requires creative thinking. It also requires discussions across various fields of expertise. It is especially important to have such conversations outside the formal negotiating arenas. I congratulate the IUCN, the World Commission on Environmental Law, and the University of Oslo for making this conference a reality. The meeting will facilitate critical input to processes that Norway attaches great importance to. This includes the ongoing efforts to conclude a global treaty on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction and a new treaty to combat plastic pollution. I therefore want to express my gratitude to all those present here. Your work matters. I wish you a successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Minister Huitfeldt. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And first and foremost, thank you for your important message. Dear guests, the moment for this exchange could not be more opportune. This year, 2022, marks important anniversaries of milestones in the development of international environmental law. The 50th anniversary of the Stockholm Declaration on the Human Environment and the subsequent establishment of the United Nations Environment Programme in Nairobi. The 40th anniversary of the adoption of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea in 1982, 30 years of the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, and the adoption of the landmark multilateral environmental agreements, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Convention on Biological Diversity, and the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. But the objective of this conference is not to celebrate past achievements. This is not the time for complacency. The science is very clear. In order to address the intensifying global environmental crises, which are also human rights crises and can turn into a humanitarian crisis, we have a very small and rapidly closing window of opportunity. Dear friends, the droughts and fires in Europe, the floods in Pakistan, the rising sea levels on the shores of low-lying islands show us how a runaway climate looks like. Devastating, unplannable, and ultimately unlivable in many places. And if this is the reality already now with only about 1.2 degrees warming, how will the world look like for our children and the generations thereafter? Every degree of warming, and honestly, every ton of greenhouse gases emitted into the atmosphere will increase the probability of severe droughts, fires, floods, and famine. It will impact biodiversity and ecosystems and create risks to health, livelihoods, food and water supply, and human security. And yet, we are currently headed towards a 2 to 3 degree warmer world. And this is why the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres started his speech last week during the Climate Week in New York with the words, "Our world is in big trouble." The climate crisis is the defining issue of our time, but it is not the only challenge. Nature across the globe has been altered by humans, with more species threatened by extinction than ever before. This poses a serious risk to global food security and the resilience of agricultural systems. The rate of global change in nature and natural systems is unprecedented in human history, with the largest global impact coming from land use change. This situation means that most societal and environmental goals and international agreements, also the Sustainable Development Goals or the goals in the Paris Agreement, will most likely not be achieved if we continue with business as usual. And yet, we still have a chance. But the chance depends on the choices we make in this decade. Global net emissions can be reduced, and they can go down to net zero 2050. Nature can be conserved, restored, and sustainably managed, and pollution can be stopped if the main drivers are addressed. But this can only be achieved by transformative change, by the fundamental system-wide reorganization across economic, social, and technological factors, including paradigms, goals, and values. The backside is that such systems transitions are unprecedented in terms of scale, and the time span for making informed decisions is short. According to science, these transformative changes need to happen within the next 10 years in order to hopefully see their effects around 2050. And this is why we speak of the critical decade. Law is a crucial governance tool to bring about such changes, not only in creating a global level playing field that avoids free riding, but in creating the legal structures for a coordinated, fair, and effective response that is commensurate with these global challenges. But not only international law is needed, but legal responses and changes at all levels, including regional, national, local to community and village levels. And not only environmental law is needed, but a legal system that protects and enhances the environment and recognizes its profound value for other objectives, such as the enjoyment of human rights, economic development, and social stability and welfare. And this is what we will do and explore and discuss for the next 4 days. The tools that the law already provides and the changes needed to make it stronger and more effective. The environmental rule of law, its meaning and implementation. We will cover the atmosphere, the biosphere, the oceans, soils, wetlands, freshwater. We will look at new principles and concepts, such as the human right to a clean and healthy environment, cross-compliance, resilience, and non-regression. We will address intertemporal, transgenerational, and future rights of generations not yet born, and ways to include the non-human, the natural world, into legal deliberations of justice and fairness. We will discuss in smaller parallel sessions and in broader plenary roundtables, in a constructive spirit to deepen our common understanding of the power of law, to learn from each other and to enlighten each other. After all, we'll have for most of the time, we will have Edward Munch's beautiful painting of the sun with us, which you may have seen on the conference website and the program and everywhere we promoted this conference. But there's a reason for that. Munch painted the sun for the university's aula as a symbol of enlightenment, the most noble task of academia. And we will try to be inspired by it and live up to it. This conference would have been impossible without the tremendous support by our partners, first and foremost by the University of Oslo, the Faculty of Law, for their help and support and for opening these beautiful meeting venues to us. To the International Union for the Conservation of Nature for generously supporting this conference. To the Norwegian Environment Agency, Pluricourts, the Department of Public and International Law, the Research Group for Natural Resources Law, the Norwegian Institute for Water Research, the Asian Development Bank, and the City of Oslo for their financial and in-kind support. I would also like to thank the United Nations Environment Programme, the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment, the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, NORAD, the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, and the International Council for Environmental Law, as well as many more national and international partners for their help, support, and encouragement. I would also like to thank the many, many people behind the scenes without whom this endeavor would have been impossible. First and foremost, WCL Executive Officer Roberto Koh, who not only worked for months and months on the demanding logistics of this conference, but also 10 days ago welcomed his first child into this world. There are many more to thank, and I will come back to this at the very end of this conference. Before I pass the floor to the Dean of the faculty, Professor Ragnhild Hennum, please allow me 4 very brief housekeeping remarks. First, the conference is hybrid. You can follow the sessions online on Zoom, and you'll find the links to the sessions on our website. Also, interpretation is available, but only for the plenary sessions, which are mainly in this room, and for one of the parallel sessions, and that's the one that takes place in a room called Gamle Festsaal. These are simultaneously interpreted into French, English, and Spanish. Please use your own portable device, electronic devices and headsets to access the interpretation. We have a wireless internet, and you see the name of the internet and the password spread around in different places all over the venue. For the coffee and lunch breaks, please go just outside this building and to the right to a building called Domus Bibliotheca. There are students who will support you and show you the way, but due to the large number of participants, we can only provide lunch to the speaker, which have a badge. Third, please be aware that there is no food and drinks allowed inside the plenary rooms and auditorium. And fourth, if you're not a member of the World Commission on Environmental Law, please go to our website and register. And it is now my great pleasure to give the floor to the Dean of the Faculty of Law, Professor Ragnhild Hennem.
Minister, justices, friends and colleagues, we are at a crossroads. The decisions we make now can secure a livable future. These words are not mine, perhaps some of you recognize them, but they are the words of the chair of the IPCC, Ho Sung Lee, in April 2022. When IPCC Working Group 3 released their last report. The co-chair of the working group, Jim Skea, said it even stronger. It's now or never if we want to limit global warming to 1.5%. This is the emerging backdrop of this conference. At the University of Oslo and the Faculty of Law, we are proud to co-host this conference together with the Commission of Environmental Law, a part of the International Union of Conservation of Nature. Climate change and climate crisis are high on the agenda in this faculty, but also at the University of Oslo as large. Throughout all the faculties, we are working on climate change, and we are working on the sustainability goals. The theme of this conference is the transformative power of law. This is, of course, a heading that make every lawyer happy, because we have always known this, that law actually is not only conservative, but they can also be transformative. So, and together you'll try to answer the question, can the challenges be solved by using the legal tools available? To answer this question, we need to bring together the best brains across nations and sectors. At the Faculty of Law, we are proud to give a small contribution to this by co-hosting this conference. It's also a pleasure to welcome you in this particular room. This is the university's aula, built on occasion of the University of Oslo's 100th anniversary in 1911. The aula is decorated by the painter Edvard Munch, as Professor Voigt said. There are a total of 11 pictures, which the sun hanging behind me is the main work, together with Alma Mater, and on this wall, history. And I think I shall allow myself a little fun fact here. Can you all see that guy, that bust on the pedestal? Yeah, that's the university's first rector, Valdemar Brøgger. And he was elected in 1907. The university existed almost 100 years without a rector, and then he was elected in 1907, and he was a strong promoter of having the Ola built, and he was raising money for it. But he opposed Munch's paintings. He thought they were far too modern and very vulgar. Down there, you can see the chemists in the small picture down there. What chemists are doing chemistry naked? So, and he was particularly, Brøgger was particularly irritated by the blue stones in history, because he was a professor in geology. So it's some kind of irony now that he is actually standing forever faced, looking at the annoying blue stones in the picture. I've seen from the program that you will have the opportunity to learn more about Munch and Norwegian art later this week, so I think I'll stop here. Once again, it's a pleasure to welcome you all to the University of Oslo and the Faculty of Law. I wish everyone the best of luck with the conference, and the world is depending on us jointly finding answers to the questions you are going to discuss. Thank you.
I need... Thank you. Is this on? Thank you. First, thank you, Professor Ragnhild Hennem, for your wonderful words. And thanks to Sveinung Bjelland, pianist. He played a piece by the Norwegian composer Edvard Grieg titled From Days of Youth. We have now 3 pre-recorded video messages for you. 3 pre-recorded video messages from people who would have loved to be here but could not due to other commitments. But we will play them one after the other, and we will start with a video message from the president of the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, Razan Al-Mubarak. She will be followed by a video address from the Director General of the United Nations Environment Programme, Inga Andersen. And the third video address is from the Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, Mr. Achim Steiner.
Good morning. It is my great honor to address the opening of the Oslo International Environmental Law Conference. And I wanted to take this opportunity to thank all of you who are attending this conference. Your interest, your expertise are critical considering the urgency and the importance of environmental issues we face. We all know that we are losing nature at an incredible rate. And in addition to this loss, we are also faced with the challenge of climate change. In a report published in 2019, the IPBES identified 5 key drivers of nature loss, which have accelerated since 1970. The first driver is land and sea use change. Half of all habitable land today is used for agriculture and livestock. In the past 50 years alone, there has been a 4-fold increase in the number of marine dead zones. The second driver is climate change. As we've all observed, forest fires are increasing, coral reefs are being bleached with more than 99% to be lost if we go beyond 2 degrees Celsius. The third driver is natural resource exploitation. 93% of fish stocks are fished at or beyond maximum sustainable levels. The fourth driver is pollution, and the fifth is invasive alien species. In mid-September, it was made clear to me when I attended the UN General Assembly and Climate Week in New York that reversing these trends will require a collective and multilateral solution. Our solutions must be effective, they need to be just, they need to be fair. Solutions must also consider both the North-South divide and the needs of today must be balanced against the needs of tomorrow. It was also clear to me that addressing climate change alone will not solve the biodiversity crisis. These 2 existential crises must be tackled together and equally. It has been more than 50 years since the adoption of the Stockholm Declaration and Action Plan for the Human Environment, the agreement that established UNEP and also led to the Convention on Biodiversity, the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. IUCN, established in 1948, is a global conservation organization that is critically important to address the nature conservation challenges. And as such, IUCN is keenly interested in promoting and helping implement and adopt all environmental agreements through its 1,400 members. Ladies and gentlemen, for conservation measures to be effective, durable, and sustainable, not only is financial support required, but equally important are the regulatory frameworks, environmental regulations, and laws that must be effectively implemented and enforced. And this can only happen by empowering implementation agencies around the world through access to knowledge and through capacity building programs. Effective conservation requires spatial planning, zoning laws, respect for indigenous people's rights and human rights. Sometimes it requires courts to step in and judges to not only understand the importance of environmental regulations, but also that these must be justly, fairly, and swiftly enforced. I take this opportunity to commend the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law and its members for bringing together so many different stakeholders at this conference to discuss the legal tools that we have and those that we need, not only to inform the work of IUCN, but also its multiple stakeholders. Together, our work can support the conservation of nature for all. Thank you very much.
And Professor of Law at the University of Oslo for the invitation to speak today. 2022 provides us with a chance to reflect on environmental law and on the progress that has been made since the birth of the environmental movement at the Stockholm Conference 50 years ago. This progress has been considerable. From a standing start, 176 countries now have environmental laws. 164 countries have created cabinet-level bodies responsible for environmental protection. Almost as many countries and nations have enshrined the right to a healthy environment in their constitutions or in their national frameworks. And this year also marks 40 years of the Montevideo Environmental Law Program. And in July, the United Nations General Assembly recognized the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, which we all hope can be a game changer. And yet, despite these laws, the planet is in deep crisis. In fact, in a triple planetary crisis, a crisis of climate change, a crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, and a crisis of pollution and waste. You don't need me to lay out the scale of the crisis here. You can see it for yourself just by looking at the front page of your newspaper or by looking around you. The crisis tells us three things about the law. One, that law does not necessarily mean justice. And two, that we need to refocus the system to better protect the planet and the people who live on it. And three, that we need to innovate in environmental law. We need to prioritize an approach that puts the environment at the center of the law and imposes a duty on humans to make choices consistent with ecological integrity and planetary boundaries. We must equip judges with the knowledge necessary to advocate fairly for people and the climate and the planet to truly understand the importance of intergenerational justice. And we must also speak not just of environmental rights, but, I think, of the rights of the environment. There are examples of legal identities granted to rivers and mountains. This matters for indigenous people. It also matters because in this linear economy model where we discard waste relentlessly into the environment, does not the environment also have rights? That's a conversation that we need to have. And we must reimagine multilateralism, moving towards what the UN Secretary General calls modern, inclusive, and networked multilateralism. The proposed global instrument to end plastic pollution, which member states are now working towards, gives us a chance to do just that. Friends, we have much work ahead of us to end the triple planetary crisis, but we cannot do it without solid and appropriate underlying law. It is for this reason that the work you do will be so critical for the future of this planet. Thank you.
Chair of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law, dear Professor Christina Voigt, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to join the 2022 Oslo International Environmental Law Conference. It takes place as we witness a climate emergency that is hitting much faster than many expected. This year, unprecedented heat waves, droughts, and floods have wreaked havoc in every corner of the globe. There is nothing natural about the scale of such disasters. With it, climate injustice is becoming more apparent than ever. To take just one example, consider Pakistan, where the flash floods left vast tracts of the country underwater, devastating lives and livelihoods with impacts for years to come. Yet the country accounts for just 1% of greenhouse gas emissions currently that are driving climate change. With the COP27 in Egypt on the horizon, the issue of loss and damage is rightly being raised by developing countries. In tandem, the degradation and destruction of our natural world, which underpins the well-being of our societies and economies wherever you live on this planet, continues at an unrelenting pace. Yet there are reasons to also be hopeful. We are beginning to see citizens across the world invoking legal and constitutional rights to hold their governments accountable. That includes protecting the right to life for present and future generations and preserving their right to a healthy environment. As the issue of climate change and the continued degradation of our natural resources moves increasingly to the domain of jurisprudence and constitutional law, citizens need up-to-date platforms to participate and contribute meaningfully in this critical and evolving area. In this respect, I see three key focus areas we could approach. First, we need to support communities with next-generation tools that will help them to hold government institutions and businesses to account so they fulfill their obligations to ensure a cleaner and healthy environment. The United Nations Development Programme's new environmental justice strategy aims to ensure protection and justice for those who are experiencing the consequences of the environmental crises. Consider, for instance, Tanzania, where UNDP has supported the Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance to handle disputes related to environmental human rights violations. Or to Kyrgyzstan, where legal aid centers have advised thousands of people on land issues. UNDP and our partners are also working closely with indigenous peoples and local communities to strengthen their rights to own, manage and control land and water resources. We know that this is a proven way to protect our natural world, reduce inequalities, empower women, and provide new livelihood opportunities. Second, laws need to be more directly informed by the people who are affected by injustice. In this respect, UNDP has worked with 97 countries to strengthen women's leadership in the management of natural resources. As a result, in countries such as Zambia, for instance, will require a gender balance in governance committees that manage indigenous forests. Or consider UNDP's Climate Promise Initiative, which is supporting over 120 countries right now to enhance and implement their nationally determined contributions, their national climate strategies. At the heart of this process are broad stakeholder consultations which have already engaged diverse communities across 67 countries. We are breaking new ground. There is also a clear need to ensure access to information by getting people online and closing the digital divide. We know that this will allow people to have their say on critical decisions that in turn will affect their future, including on climate change. Third, we need a transformation in how we think about the legal rights of future generations. That includes their right to inherit a clean, healthy and sustainable environment. In this field, the role of national human rights institutions to advance climate and environmental justice is key. As part of the UN Secretary-General's call to action for human rights, we in UNDP are supporting these institutions to now address climate change more effectively at the country level. Through our work with some 100 of these institutions worldwide, we are also providing tailored support to environmental human rights defenders. In this respect, all countries must find the political will to end the impunity for acts of intimidation, violence and, tragically, murder that continue often unabated. Taken as a whole, last year over 30 million people benefited from improved access to justice through UNDP's work with countries and their judicial systems to date. And I know that many of you in the hall today are part of that overall ecosystem in which we are strengthening access to justice. We can also be inspired by countries such as Germany, which has a constitutional reference to future generations within an article on environmental protection. Analysis has shown that countries that have enshrined environmental protection in their constitutions have more quickly reduced their ecological footprints. May be obvious, but not self-evident. Professor Voigt, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year we mark the 50th anniversary of the Stockholm Conference, which ushered in a new era of environmental legislation and multilateral environmental agreements. In fact, it is there where we last met, Christina. Most recently, the United Nations General Assembly recognized that a clean, healthy and sustainable environment is indeed a universal human right. The entire UN family and key partners like the International Union for the Conservation of Nature are now working with countries and communities to help them fully leverage legislation to respect, protect and promote the rights of nature in tandem with human rights. That includes vital efforts to promote a just transition to more sustainable models of production and consumption. In short, human inaction has led us to multiple crises, including climate change, pollution and biodiversity loss. So, human action, including through the power of law, can also set us on a new pathway, helping to secure a more sustainable and more equitable and ultimately more just future for both people and planet. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you by means of this brief address, and I wish you an excellent meeting and look forward to continuing to work with many of you in the years to come. Thank you.
I would like to thank very much Razan Al-Mubarak, Inga Anderson and Achim Steiner for their wonderful messages. We would have loved to have them with us, but we are very, very grateful that they took the time to record these video messages for us. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my great pleasure to welcome here on the stage His Excellency Dr. Emmanuel Ugira Shebuya. He is the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of the Republic of Rwanda. He is the former President of the East African Court of Justice and Dean Emeritus of the National University of Rwanda Faculty of Law. He was awarded a lifetime appointment as a distinguished fellow and eminent jurist at Jindal Global Law School in India as exemplar jurist and for his contribution of law and justice, which has transcended geographical boundaries and jurisdictional limitations. And if I may say so, a long-standing and dear friend of the World Commission on Environmental Law. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christina. Thank you very much, dear Christina. for having invited me to this conference. And also, I'm really glad that I'm meeting a lot of friends who I met in my former life when I was very much active in the World Commission on Environmental Law. Let me begin by a disclaimer here, Excellencies, Justices. On my way here, I noticed that I forgot my speaking points in my room. And I thought, wow, what am I going to do here? But I remembered that I've been part and parcel of the World Commission on Environmental Law, and that I've been in positions where I saw the transformative power of law in addressing different challenges, including environmental challenges. So I noticed that I have something to speak on. Let me begin by saying that law, generally, is a force. And just like any other force, law can be a force for good or even a force for bad. So it's critically important to analyze the topic today, the transformative power of law, addressing global challenges. And the major questions that we have here is it the absence of law that we have today as humanity, and or is it the lack of implementation of the laws that we have in order to address global environmental challenges? Having served as a dean, as a judge, and now as a minister of justice, I have come to this conclusion that it is not the absence of law that we have, especially in the part of the world that I come from. It is the lack of political will to implement the laws that we have. Why do I say this? And I've always asked myself questions when I've had opportunities to speak to a forum such as this. And the question that I've always asked myself, why is it that we do gather around in this forum and over the many years that humanity has been in existence, what is the predominant work for humanity, including what I do today as a Minister of Justice? And I've come to a conclusion that what we want to achieve as humanity is a safe and just place for humanity. And we've done this for so many years now. But in order to achieve a safe and just space for humanity, I've come to discover now as a Minister of Justice where I sit, that you can only achieve the safe and just place for humanity if you take care of two important elements. The first element is the foundational elements of humanity, and here I talk about the basic rights, the right to food, the right to life, the right to a safe and clean environment. But these foundational rights in themselves are not enough if you take care of them. You also do need to take care of another important element that is quite key to the safe and just place for humanity. And this is taking care of the environmental ceilings that we have. If we do continue, as Professor Voigt said earlier, business as usual, we are going to erode the environmental ceilings, and we will reach a point, and we only have a decade to take care of these environmental ceilings, or to ensure that we don't transcend these environmental ceilings. And if we transcend these environmental ceilings, then we better forget the foundational rights that I talked about. You cannot talk about the right to life if we don't deal with the challenges posed by climate change. You cannot talk about the right to a decent environment if you don't deal with all the global challenges that we have, all the environmental global challenges that we have. So how do we deal with these global challenges? one of the answers is to be found in law, as the topic today posits, the transformative power of law. But law in itself has its own limits. It's just one element of dealing with the global environmental challenges. The other question is, and now I speak as a politician, I've been a politician for the last 1 year, it is now the political will to implement the laws that are very good in the books. So political will is extremely key if we are going to see the transformative power of law in addressing global environmental challenges. Then another important element in order to see the transformative power of law in addressing environmental challenges, and now I speak to my former colleagues, judges, because I'm no longer a judge, is how do we interpret the laws that we have? As I said, I don't believe that we have lack of laws. We only do either we don't want to implement the laws, or we interpret them in such a way that it's self-defeating and we don't achieve the safe and just place for humanity which we all clamor for. So I do believe that the transformative power of law can only be achieved if judges interpret the laws that we have in order to deal with the most pressing global challenges that we have, one of which is environmental challenges. I do remember as a judge dealing with environmental cases, and whenever we were in the room deliberating on the laws, it was quite interesting to see that we would engage in an exercise of interpreting the same law, but interpret it in different ways, given either our backgrounds or what we think was the objective of the law. But I do believe that when laws are put in place, they are there to ensure that we arrive at that space that I talked about, which is the safe and just place for humanity. Let me conclude by saying that in order for law to be transformative and address global environmental challenges, whenever laws are created, they should be created with principles, and the principles are we achieving a safe and just place for humanity? That's how law can be a transformative tool. Let me briefly talk about my country, Rwanda, a small country, landlocked country, poor if you want to measure it according to how we measure wealth and poverty. But Rwanda, a decade ago, decided to ban plastic bags. And I do remember when the decision was being taken, a few debates surrounded that decision. The first one was, you are a poor country, investors like using plastic bags, how are you going to even attract investors? The second question was, we know that Rwanda is not the first country which has in its law books the banning of plastic bags. And I must mention that this law was inspired by laws elsewhere, especially in Africa. And the question was, is it just another good law that you're putting in books, which will never be implemented? So that was the political will. Be that as it may, Rwanda passed the law, and it strictly banned use of plastic bags. And I can say that we are still alive as a country. This did not stop the attraction of investors. It only led to the attraction of good investors who care for environment. So let me say this as I conclude. We do not lack laws. The laws are there, and the only way that the laws can become a transformative power in order to address global environmental challenges is that the laws are properly interpreted by the judges, and then there should be political will from the executive in order to ensure that the laws are used appropriately to address global environmental challenges. I hope I've survived leaving my notes in the hotel room, but thank you very much, and I wish you a very good conference.
Thank you so much, Minister Ogira Shibuya. I think we all appreciated your wise word, and putting the test to all of us is what we're doing supporting that safe space for humanity. I think it's a very important guiding light that you've given us. Dear colleagues, I would now like to invite to the stage here Dr. Parvez Hassan. He is the one of 3 chair emeritus, or 4 chairs emeritus that have come here to Oslo, chairs emeritus of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law. Dr. Parvez Hassan is senior advocate at the Supreme Court of Pakistan and a senior partner at Hassan & Hassan Advocates in Lahore. His academic degrees include a Master's of Law from Yale and a Doctorate of Law from Harvard, and he is also the president of the Pakistan Environmental Law Association and a passionate defender of environmental laws. Parvez, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina. Good morning to all of you. I'm really overawed by the warmth of Christina's welcome, the brilliance of her presentation, the majesty of this particular hall, the splendor of the music, and of course, the wisdom of the speakers. I think you got it right, a good beginning, and I'm glad that I'm a part of the opening today. My remarks have a very brief title. It's a glass half full toward a global treaty on environment. And I want to start with a personal experience, which was in 2010, when my good friend Antonio Benjamin invited me to share the huge tragedy of the floods in Pakistan with a global audience in Manaus in Brazil. The 2010 floods in Pakistan had brought unprecedented devastation which aroused international concern and support. But today, in 2022, the magnitude of the 2010 floods has been dwarfed by the enormity of this year's tragedy, which reduced 1/3 of Pakistan underwater, resulted in the loss of over 1,500 persons and a staggering livestock wealth and the destruction of its rice crops, which account a significant part of the world's food trade. Data presently available has linked this year's floods in Pakistan to global warming. The loss estimates are over $30 billion. The misery of over 3 million persons affected and many dislocated from homes to living without food, without water, and basic hygienic facilities under an open sky, and for a few, in makeshift tents in the midst of mosquitoes, snakes, and disease, has all heightened the global attention of climate justice, climate reparations, and loss and damage that Achim Steiner also talked about. I mentioned this in my opening remarks to draw the attention of this distinguished assembly to right the wrongs being inflicted on developing countries like Pakistan with a negligible carbon footprint by the developed and industrial countries which contribute overwhelmingly to the global fossil fuel emissions. But I really want to move to another important message, to acknowledge the huge pleasure it is for me to attend what I call Christina's coronation in Oslo. It is lovely to meet so many friends from all over the world, all of us here to support and grow international environmental law. I was introduced to this field in 1977 by the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP as it is known, when there was a regional alert to root this interest in the Asia-Pacific region. Ding Tolentino in the Philippines and I were, I recall, the first native-born baptized in what was then a new field called environmental protection. 45 years later, there remain formidable challenges in the region and globally, but there are a few impressive achievements, a glass half full, to cheer. In the time available, I welcome the recent United Nations General Assembly Resolution 2022, affirming the right to a healthy environment as an essential human right. I do so in the hope and with the expectation that this historic resolution will finally lead to an international treaty on environment and development, culminating the soft law process started in Stockholm in '72 and continued in the World Charter of Nature in 1982, the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992, and the Earth Charter at The Hague in 2000, and the Johannesburg Summit in 2012. Several other important players have supported this evolving symphony. And at home in Pakistan, I assisted the Supreme Court of Pakistan in the historic Shahla Zia case in 1994 to hold, foreseeing then 20 years earlier, the 2022 UN General Assembly resolution on the right to a healthy environment, for the Pakistan Supreme Court to hold in 1994 that the fundamental rights to life and dignity protected by the Pakistan Constitution include the environment. This is typical of the leadership provided by the judiciaries of South Asia in the development of international environmental law. The post-war processes that evolved and matured the internationalization of the protection of human rights has provided a compelling compass. The vision of Eleanor Roosevelt from the USA, Ronnie Cosson from France, and Charles Malik from Lebanon led to the soft law principles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. And it took 16 long years of international statesmanship to convert the declaratory content of the Universal Declaration into binding hard law in the 1966 International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights and Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. For the environment, Maurice Strong, Canada, Tommy Ko from Singapore, and Jamshed Marker from Pakistan led the initial successes at Stockholm and Rio, supported by the dedicated energy of Wolfgang Burhane from Germany, the first chair of WCL for the World Charter of Nature. Mikhail Gorbachev and Stephen Rockefeller led the Earth Charter in 2000 with significant support from the World Commission on Environmental Law. WCEL also provided one of the earliest efforts to codify the emerging concept and corpus of soft law on the environment, I was privileged as the then WCEL chair to lead the finalization of the IUCN draft Covenant on Environment and Development to its launch at the Congress on Public International Law at the UN General Assembly in 1995. With its detailed commentary on its 75 articles, the IUCN draft covenant remains to date the most comprehensive effort to a global treaty on the environment. The WCEL membership and leadership has remained in the forefront of efforts for a global treaty on the environment. The laudable initiative of President Emmanuel Macron for the Global Pact on the Environment in 2017 involved a select and restricted group invited to Paris, which included 4 past, present, and future chairs of the WCEL. So we can all see WCEL is well poised to continue to assist and develop international environmental law in the years ahead. WCEL has catalyzed the involvement of the world's leading experts in conferences on international environmental law, such as this one. We owe its foundational wisdom to Antonio Benjamin, who will join us later today. Also, Nick Robinson, both through WCEL and ICEL, has continued to provide stellar support to the development of international environmental law in this generation. In the end, I reiterate my sentiment and wish in my opening remarks. For half a century, the international community has acknowledged that the low carbon footprint developing countries and small island states particularly are adversely affected by the industrial activities and the consumption patterns of the North. Pakistan is the most vulnerable and recent example of this climate injustice. I urge this distinguished assembly to support the voice of these countries helpless in the face of climate change. I believe that rich countries should bear their fair share of the attributable cost of climate adaptation, emergency response, and recovery in countries that have played little or no role in causing today's calamities. Happily, Professor Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia, who will address this conference in a later session, has elsewhere supported this demand for climate justice. His eloquent summation, too often, he says, rich and powerful countries deny their historical responsibilities, whether for colonialism, whether for slavery or climate change. All countries are responsible for decarbonizing their energy systems and managing their land and ecosystems responsibly and sustainably. Yet the developing world will not forget the leading role that rich countries have played in creating today's worldwide climate disasters. As climate-related losses rapidly mount, global demands for climate justice will only grow. It would be good if the upcoming Global Climate Summit, COP27 in Egypt, will satisfactorily address and resolve this issue. For me personally, it has been a remarkable lifelong privilege to be a part of the World Commission on Environmental Law. And Christina, I joined the 4 living WCEL chairs. All of us have traveled to Oslo, one on his way, and we have traveled to express our solidarity with you and to wish you and your growing flock a smiling earth in the years ahead. May, as we say in my faith, Allah and His blessings be with you all. I thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Pavis. Thank you for your words, for your speech, but most of all, thank you for your many, many years of hard work on the front lines of environmental law. Thank you. And you left with my speaking notes, I think.
Make sure these are not Emmanuel's.
No, they're not in manuals. I'm sorry, but thank you so much. I'm also to convey the regards and regrets by the Norwegian Minister for Climate and Environment, Minister Espen Barth Eide. He wanted to come and speak, but he was called to a preparatory meeting for COP27 in Egypt that takes place at the same time, but he really also wanted to join us. Dear friends, we are almost at the end of this opening plenary, and I would like to ask you to allow me to share this moment to commemorate a wonderful law scholar and a long-standing WCL member who tragically passed away just a few days ago. Please join me in paying our respect and tribute to Professor Meinhard Dölle. Meinhard was born in Germany, but he spent most of his professional life in Canada, where he held a chair at the University of Dalhousie. At the time of his passing, he was the Associate Dean at the Schulich School of Law. And in May 2008, he was a visiting scholar at the Environmental Law Center at the IUCN in Bonn in Germany. Meinhard was an excellent scholar. He was deeply passionate about climate change, and he had profound knowledge about everything natural. He was a wonderful and inspiring teacher and a kind and wise colleague. Those of you who knew him personally certainly agree with me that he smiled, always smiled. Our thoughts go to his family and his 3 daughters. Meinhard had sent an abstract for this conference together with his colleague David Wright. Title is Canada's Net Zero Accountability Legislation, a New Bridge Over the Implementation Gap, which will be presented by David at 2 p.m. in Auditorium 4 today. David has also kindly organized a run in memory of Meinhard. David says, all are welcome. Meinhard would be proud of anyone with a gumption to get up early and get moving, but the pace will be slower than Meinhard's would be. If you're interested in joining that run, it takes place tomorrow morning at 6:45 a.m. and it starts right outside this building. The expected time is less than 45 minutes and it's less than 4 kilometers, rain or shine. With that, dear friends, we are closing that formal opening high-level ceremony, and I would like to move on to our first conference, Keynote. This year, as we already heard, marks the 40th anniversary of the Montevideo Environmental Law Program administered by the United Nations Environment Program. Since 1982, UNEP has conducted its environmental law activities on the basis of those 10-year environmental Montevideo programs for the development and periodic review of environmental law. In March 2019, the UN Environment Assembly adopted the 5th Montevideo program. This current intergovernmental program on promoting and implementing the environmental rule of law runs from 2020 to December 2029. On the UNEP website, it says about the environmental rule of law that it is central to sustainable development. It integrates environmental needs with the essential elements of the rule of law and provides the basis for improving environmental governance. It highlights environmental sustainability by connecting it with fundamental rights and obligations. It reflects universal moral values and ethical norms of behavior, and it provides a foundation for environmental rights and obligations. Without the environmental rule of law and the enforcement of legal rights and obligations, environmental governance may be arbitrary, that is, discretionary, subjective, and unpredictable. It is therefore our great privilege to welcome as the first keynote speaker, Dr. Patricia Kamedi-Mbote, who will talk about the environmental rule of law in addressing global environmental challenges. Patricia is the director of the Law Division of the United Nations Environment Programme. Previously, she was the founding research director of the International Environmental Law Research Center and the program director for Africa for more than 20 years. Patricia is a member of the Senior Council Bar in Kenya and has been a professor of law at the School of Law, University of Nairobi, where she has taught over 30 years and served as dean. She served as chair of the Association of Environmental Law Lecturers in African universities and has contributed to the development of similar initiatives for North Africa and the Middle East and for judges. Patricia holds a doctorate and master degree in law from Stanford University and a higher doctorate from the University of Nairobi. She also holds a master degree from Warwick University, and she was awarded an honorary degree of law by the University of Oslo. Her talk will be followed by a brief commentary from Maître Ayman Sherkawi. Ayman is the deputy chair of the World Commission on Environmental Law, and he is the director at the Hassan II International Center for Environmental Training in Rabat, Morocco. He is also the coordinator of the Mohammed VI Prize for the Climate and Sustainable Development. He is lead counsel for climate change and the Center for International Sustainable Development Law and the regional facilitator of major groups and stakeholders in Africa elected by the African organizations accredited to UNEP. It is now my great pleasure to welcome you, Patricia, here on the stage and give you the floor.
Good morning, dear friends and colleagues, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by thanking Professor Christina Voigt for bringing all of us together here and all the organizers who have worked tirelessly for several months now to pull this conference together. I would also like to thank the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law, the University of Oslo, and the many other organizations and individuals that have worked together to bring this tour de force that has resulted in a spectacular event. I am delighted and humbled to be addressing this august gathering of environmental law professionals, including those from the youth chapter of the World Commission on Environmental Law. Thank you for this opportunity to connect with old and new partners, as well as longtime friends, and to strengthen and move forward the environmental law agenda at a critical juncture for people and the planet. I feel honored to really have worked with many of you in the quest for a just and sustainable world as a professor and a practitioner. I have enjoyed a great relationship with the Faculty of Law at the University of Oslo for over 30 years, and have also great memories of this aula, which is where the honorary doctorate was awarded in 2017. Now, as the director of Law Division at UNEP, I see great opportunities to carry the environmental law agenda forward by hearing from you on the new areas of research being explored in the field of environmental law at all levels. The consolidation of bodies of learning for the benefit of people and the planet is critical in the multidisciplinary area that environmental law is. Today's conference may not be the first one of its kind, but your conversations over the coming days couldn't be more important, more significant, and indeed timelier. This is because, as has been stated over and over again, 2022 has been the year of celebrating 5 decades of international environmental law movement. The conference also presents an opportunity to celebrate environmental multilateralism. The last 50 years have demonstrated an impressive record of environmental achievement. Even more significantly, and certainly a more lasting accomplishment, has been the growth and shaping of the multilateral institutions that will continue to protect the environment in the years to come. There is no doubt that much of this shaping has been guided by innovations in research that have informed law and policy on environmental issues. The shaping has also contributed to demonstrating the transformative power of law, which is the running theme of this conference. Environmental law as a discipline has grown in the last 5 decades, and this growth has happened in direct competition with economic imperatives. The transformative power of environmental law is evidenced by the fact that against all odds, states have come together to address growing environmental crises and are rowing fiercely in the same direction. From discourses that sought to derail actions for the environment in favor of economic development, we now have countries pulling together to address the existential planetary crisis. It is in this spirit that I welcome warmly the discussions and research that will be shared over the coming days on various aspects of the transformative power of law in tackling environmental challenges. Distinguished participants, colleagues, and friends, I have 6 key messages to share with you. The first message is that our task in the next couple of days takes place against a sobering backdrop. And I think we've heard about this backdrop from a number of speakers in the opening session. People are dying and suffering from climate change. People are dying and suffering from nature and biodiversity loss when a village is buried in a landslide because the hill above has been stripped of trees, when degraded soils lose their capacity to produce food, and people are dying and suffering from pollution. Indoor and outdoor pollution continue to be the greatest cause of deaths. About 7 million premature deaths are recorded from pollution each year. The intensive use of our planet's finite resources and increasing inequalities have all contributed to consequences that compromise the gains already achieved. Crop production and infrastructure are severely threatened by weather hazards, including droughts, heat waves, cold waves, tropical cyclones, and floods. The United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction registered a total of 175 disasters during the 2020 to 2022 period. Of this, 88% have meteorological, climatological, and hydrological origins. You know the numbers. You have read the science. You understand it. More and more of us are living with the reality and consequences of this crisis each passing year. And you don't need me to tell you about the devastating assault on human rights that we continue to witness concerning environmental human rights defenders. On 29th of September 2022, just last week, Global Witness released their latest findings. 200 land and environmental land defenders were killed in 2021, nearly 4 people a week, killed for defending their homes, land, and livelihoods. for defending ecosystems vital for biodiversity and the climate. People we should be celebrating, not murdering. And this is despite the law giving people the right to hold actors accountable for failure to protect the environment. And it is also despite the power of the law to recognize the right to a healthy environment. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, my second message is that we have come a long way in the last 5 decades in shaping the legal frameworks and institutions that will continue to protect the environment in the years to come. And a lot has been talked about the 50 years and the exponential growth of environmental law in those 50 years. From a fledgling discipline, now we have very many multilateral environmental agreements. And it's not just at the multilateral level. At the national levels, there has been rapid growth in environmental laws. And the numbers have been spoken about, but it is critical that we continue saying that more than 176 countries have framework environmental laws. Some 156 countries have established the right to a healthy environment in their domestic legal frameworks, either through constitutions, laws, jurisprudence, or participation in regional human rights treaties. The environmental rule of law as an accepted concept has grown in leaps and bounds and is continuing to evolve. From its inception in 2013, with the adoption of the UNEP Governing Council Resolution 27/9 on advancing justice, governance, and law for environmental sustainability, to the establishment of the UNEP International Advisory Council for Environmental Justice, to the adoption of the 2019 General Assembly Resolution 73/333, with emphasis on the criticality of the environmental rule of law. This resolution formed the basis for the political outcome of the special session of the United Nations Environment Assembly to commemorate 50 years of UNEP's existence in March this year. But environmental rule of law is not just a new age concept bandied around in intergovernmental circles. It imbues environmentalism in the ideals and elements of the rule of law. And we have also seen big strides in the uptick of these elements through the institutions that oversee lawmaking. You do not need me to tell you that the last decades have shown us that effective and well-implemented laws, coupled with empowered institutions, provide the enabling context necessary to deliver the environmental dimensions of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. It is evident that without law, environmental issues would not have such a central seat at the Sustainable Development table. Resilient, sustainable development demands that we look at the big picture, one in which all 3 dimensions are deemed to be equally important as they are fundamentally connected. Ignoring nature inevitably erodes human well-being and economic development. So we cannot talk about sustainable development without talking about the rule of law. We only have to look at the pollution crisis and the toxic and climate exposure and see that without the precautionary principle at play, we are our own guinea pigs, and that is not a very sustainable situation. With regard to institutions responsible for making environmental law a reality, we've seen that an important component of the transformative power of law is the existence of prosecutorial and enforcement institutions with the mandate and capacity to enforce environmental protection through investigations, administrative actions, and prosecutions before courts and tribunals. And many countries now have bodies with explicit mandates to give these general enforcement of environmental law. And importantly, Recent years have seen a continuation of complementary trends of integration and decentralization of environmental governance with positive implications for the environmental rule of law. The point I am driving home is this: environmental rule of law is both a development outcome in its own right and enabler of other outcomes. Perhaps one of the steadfast illustrations of the power of law to transform society is the intersection between human rights and the environment. And the issue of human rights and the environment has been talked about a lot this morning. That is my third message. And we see it coming from Stockholm Declaration, which paved the way for this, and the International Bill of Rights, with the two human rights covenants on civil and political rights and economic, social, and cultural rights, contributing to getting us where we are today. But our world has changed drastically since these covenants were written, and certainly the drafters did not anticipate all of today's problems. Clearly, they did not foresee the enormity of our ecological degradation and the consequent necessity for human rights norms to encompass environmental considerations. Ladies and gentlemen, promoting the right to a healthy environment is the most obvious mechanism to fulfill this need. This is evidenced in the significant move in constitutional democracies towards a rights consciousness. And of course, the greatest thing that happened in 2022 was the General Assembly recognition and adoption of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment in July 2022. This universal recognition is a powerful catalyst for accelerated environmental action. It is a fact that without environmental rule of law and the enforcement of legal rights and obligations, environmental governance will be what Christina said, discretionary, subjective, and unpredictable. The environmental rule of law implicates intergenerational and intragenerational equity. It adopts the sustainability concept and the fact that the earth and its resources are not only an investment opportunity, but a trust passed on from previous generations to present generations for the benefit of today's and tomorrow's generations. This resonates with the widely quoted statement of Chief Nana Ofori of the Akiem Aboakwa, one of the largest and wealthiest kingdoms of the then Gold Coast, now Ghana, in the 1800s. And he said, "I conceive that the land belongs to a vast majority, of whom many are dead, a few are living, and countless hosts are still unborn." The UN Secretary General has recognized this as well, linking it closely with democracy and saying that in ensuring intergenerational justice for the triple planetary crisis, democracy is critical. But before I close on this topic, I wanted to highlight the immense value of the right to a healthy environment having an ecocentric approach. And I am encouraged to note that these rights of nature will be discussed in certain sessions during this conference. The foundation for an ecocentric approach has been included in many of the texts that inspire our environmental laws. Take, for instance, the Rio Declaration, Principle 1, where it states, even though it takes an anthropocentric approach, it embraces an ecocentric approach when it affirms that human being life has to be in harmony with nature. And this ecocentric approach is further affirmed and expanded in Principle 7 of the Rio Declaration, which establishes that states shall cooperate in a spirit of global partnership to conserve, protect, and restore the health and integrity of the Earth systems. This means that the protection of environmental rights is aimed not only at humans, but also at the natural environment itself in order to guarantee the integrity of the Earth system. My fourth message then is that the transformative power of law requires environmental decision-making processes to be founded on the right to access information and participation in shaping decisions that will affect the environment. The withholding of information about environmental degradation from those affected has historically resulted in massive disasters for human lives, livelihoods, and the environment. And I think we all know of the Chernobyl incident in 1986, which is a good example of the dangers of suppressing procedural rights. It is good to note that today, procedural rights are increasingly reflected in many environmental laws at the national level, and they are also included in many regional instruments. This is important because it amplifies the positive link between a guarantee of environmental rights and improved environmental performance. Respect for human rights, let me say, is not a panacea, which will solve all our ecological problems. But unless and until activists, journalists, and the general public are free to discuss the extent of environmental degradation, such as the one Pervez was talking about in Pakistan, our natural resources will never be safeguarded. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, my fifth message is that there are massive expectations on the law and its transformative power. To accelerate action on the triple planetary crisis, laws need to do many things at many levels. Laws must be capable of facilitating a just transition to greener industries. They need to phase out coal and fossil fuels. They need to create enabling conditions for investment in climate resilient and nature positive development. Laws also need to facilitate the transition to net zero and nature positive pathways. And basically then we are saying laws almost need to do everything, and we've talked about laws being good but not delivering. So there are approaches that we need to adopt as environmental law scholars and practitioners. And I think the executive director of UNEP referred to one when she talked about the need for innovation. And legal academics need to be key players here. And we have the test case before us, which is the Plastics Treaty. And in this Plastics Treaty, it's going to be important to see how we bring all the lessons that we have learned over the years to bear on what we are doing. As legal academics, practitioners, lawyers, and writers, and also having the younger scholars with us, I think it's important to know that a lot is expected of us. And I cannot stress enough how important this conference is, because it contributes not just to what we are doing in our different spaces, but to what happens to nature and people in the years to come. To conclude then, I would like to just say that there is no question that addressing the triple planetary crisis is one of the imperatives of our time. While we have made many strides in addressing these challenges, the negative implications of our actions on the planet remain stubbornly high. Every one of us in this room knows that gains on this front will be lost unless we continue to doggedly demonstrate the transformative power of the law. Thank you once again for the immense opportunity afforded to me to share these thoughts with such an august gathering of professionals, academics, researchers, and practitioners. I wish you all very fruitful deliberations.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you so much. And I think and hope that we have Ayman Shakawi. That's not
Hello.
Ayman. That is Ayman with us.
All right.
Ayman, welcome.
Thank
And
you.
the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Christina. Excellencies, distinguished delegates. First, want to acknowledge how sorry I am not to be with you in person in this particularly impressive and magnificent aula. I was particularly struck as well by the inspiring comments we've heard so far, as well as the collegial spirit that transpires across the screen, and that is always such a delight to enjoy. I was particularly sorry as well as I saw yesterday a picture that Christina sent of a beautiful Aurora Borealis that you also enjoyed in Oslo that unfortunately I have yet to see in person. So all the more of a reason to compound how sorry I am not to be with you in person. But I am, however, particularly pleased to share very briefly some comments after this insightful, inspiring, and very precise and comprehensive comments we just heard from my dear sister, Patricia, for a series of reasons. One is because as an African myself, it is always such a source of pride and joy to hear her mastery of this issue and to have such a hero of environmental law and environmental rule of law play such a central, facilitative and important role in our space. Secondly, of course, is because of the comment themselves that she shared with us and the 6 key messages that are timely, relevant, and that also contribute to further setting the scene of the conference that unites us over the next few days. Firstly, of course, we heard about this important interface between people and planet and the very concrete reality of the negative impact of the human tragedies that are unfortunately an everyday reality all over the world. We also heard about how much we have accomplished in the last 5 decades when it comes to shaping institutional and legal framework that are at the multilateral level, but also at the national level. Patricia shared with us eloquent data when it comes to this progress, indicating, for example, some landmark moments in the evolution and the establishment of the concept of environmental rule of law. We also heard about the enormity of ecological degradation and the positive progress there has been over the last few years when it comes to the recognition of the right to a healthy, clean, and sustainable environment as a human right, bearing in mind the importance of intergenerational and intragenerational equity. Procedural rights and access to information and participation in decision-making were also outlined as being particularly important and remaining important in this, all the more so in the context that we are all familiar with. Patricia also outlined the massive expectations on the law that there are, and the reality and the perception that there is of law being good, but not necessarily delivering. Finally, Patricia, in her last key messages, indicated that addressing triple planetary crisis is one of the important priorities of our time, and that we should not lose sight of this priority so as not to lose ground when it comes to ability to rising to the challenge. In conclusion, I wanted to connect to the topic of the conference that was also reminded to us by Patricia in her remark, which is the transformative power of environmental law. And if I may make a facetious quote that is nowhere to the required protocol level, but if you may allow me to do so, there is a point I want to make using that particular quote. It is from Spider-Man, actually, and he once said, "With great power comes great responsibility." Now, evidently, this power, the transformative power of environmental law does come with the responsibility to have concrete impact on the ground that are measurable and that leave no one behind. But evidently, what is expected of us is not to go around a particular city on threads of silk and fly across between skyscraper. But it is a different kind of thread that it is important for us to cover and deepen. And as Patricia invited us to do, she was particularly keen to hear from us and to, over the next few days, across the 18 pages of agenda that we'll be very happy to explore together, what are some threads of research? What are some threads of knowledge? What are some threads of progress that we can either further deepen or further discover? And I can only further reinforce that invitation that Patricia shared with us, so that we can make sure that the conference, that we first respond to her invitation, that we are as impactful as we can be, but also that we ensure that the conference that will be uniting us over the next 3 days is an important step forward in all the different issues that we have covered so far, including, of course, the environmental rule of law. Thank you very much, everyone. And Christina, I give the screen back to you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Thank you so much, Ayman, for your reflections. I'm truly privileged to have Ayman with me in that endeavor in the World Commission on Environmental Law as the Commission's Deputy Chair. And Ayman, we do miss you here in Oslo. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the first part of the conference, and you all deserved a hopefully much welcome break at this point in time. There are refreshments available, coffee and tea, in the building called Domus Bibliotheca, which is the building to the right. If you leave this building and look to the right, you see a building with blue banners saying Domus Bibliotheca, and there you can have refreshments. And we would like to ask you to be back here at 11:30 for the first plenary roundtable. Thank you so much.